and welcome to a brand new episode of Coming Distractions brought to you by the Nerdpocalypse Podcast. I'm your host, Jay. I'm here with my co-host, Micah.
Hey.
All right, guys, we're back. This episode, we're going to talk about Black Widow. Look, the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the movies is finally back after a year-long hiatus. And their first entry is a Black Widow solo film of sorts. This one is obviously starring Scarlett Johansson, Florence Pugh, David Harbour, and Rachel Weisz. The general premise here is this takes place after Civil War, where Black Widow is sort of back doing her spy thing, back out there, after the Avengers break up, and she ends up running into her sister. More on that later. And they sort of go on this adventure together to sort of take down the Red Room, which is where Florence Pugh's character Yelena and Natalie Romanoff or Natasha Romanoff were trained as Black Widows. So, Michael, what did you think of this?
I enjoyed the movie. It's a solid entry in the MCU. It's a little bit refreshing to kind of watch an MCU movie and not have to necessarily worry about, you know, the Infinity Saga and everything that goes in it, right? Like it's a one-off, right? Like it's weird because it's like a one-off, but it's not an origin story.
Right.
Right. And I like the one-off movies, right? I like Black Panther. I like Doctor Strange. But at the same time, like my favorite movie is Captain America, the Winter Soldier. And this has, parallels to that. So it's kind of like a jack of all trades for me in that it is kind of aping my favorite movie while still being somewhat of a one shot, right? Like I know where it takes place in the timeline. I know it bookends the bookends, before the credits are about, you know, where this film fits within the Infinity Saga. But it was just cool to watch just like an MCU film and an MCU film starring a character that everyone loves. And I think that this movie is, I enjoyed this movie, but Black Widow wasn't the thing that I enjoyed the most about it.
Okay.
If that makes
fair.
any sense.
Yeah, that's fair.
David Harbour and Florence Pugh are absolute scene stealers in this movie. And it's worth it for those two, especially Florence Pugh, because her very deadpan delivery juxtaposed to Natasha's, you know, she's our hero, right? And she and Florence Pugh's character serves as a bit of an audience surrogate to like call her on her BS, right?
Right.
Like
Exactly.
Like what are you doing, right? And it's funny when you go back and in your memory and you remember like Iron Man 2, and that's sort of how Natasha's character was, the way Florence Pugh was, you know, a little cold, a little, she's not like the Black Widow that we're used to.
Right.
And it's, yeah, man, it's the more I think about this movie, the more I like it. And I'll let you go, but there's a ton of stuff here that I enjoy that I think is better than some movies and not as good as other movies. It just kind of, it falls right in the middle. Like if you broke this thing up into a hierarchy in thirds, this would be towards the top of the second third.
Okay. That's fair. So how I would categorize this movie, and it's weird, right? It's sort of not the film itself is weird, but sort of the history of this movie getting made is weird, right? Because this movie would have 100% come out earlier if Ike Perlmutter wasn't the person sort of running the money aspect of the Marvel Cinematic Universe at the time, right? For a long time. And it wasn't until a number of years ago that they gave the full reins over to Kevin Feige. And that's pretty obvious because you get things like Captain Marvel, Black Panther, where Perlmutter did not want to give female characters solo movies. He was like, yeah, nobody's gonna see that. Meanwhile, Captain Marvel made $1 billion. No one's gonna go see a black guy be a superhero. Meanwhile, Black Panther made over $1 billion. Right? Money talks. So turns out representation matters. But so I think you would have gotten this much earlier had he not been in charge. I think that's obvious. So there's like that weird history, and then to place this storyline after Civil War, like you said, you already know the before and the end of this story, or this character story at the end of Endgame, right? It's not a spoiler. She fucking dies, right? Like, okay, we know that. So how do you go about making that character interesting when you know that character's not going to be around in the future, right? And they do a really good job by weirdly making like a Pitch Perfect Phase 2 movie, which is, you know, enough about Natasha's background to sort of care about her in a general way, but then you start kind of fleshing out the background a lot more in this, right? Like Winter Soldier is the obvious movie that you should compare it to, though I don't think they're that similar. They occupy the
certain elements,
right? They occupy, and I think that's where when people conflate the two of them, I understand it, but I fundamentally disagree, because yes, they occupy the same end of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? Like Guardians of the Galaxy and the Thor movies occupy another very similar end of the universe. That doesn't make them similar, right? This is the, punching in guns, spy, military actioner end of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It happens to be my favorite part of the Marvel Universe in general, right? But yeah, I don't think they're particularly that similar. This story to me is fundamentally about found family and sexism, right? Like in a way, especially the second point, the sexism aspect is, I think, handled so much better in this than it was in Captain Marvel, where Captain Marvel it took place in the 90s and it felt like a very 90s perspective on sexism. Right. And growing up in the 90s, it felt like very, even the soundtrack speaks to it, right? Like, there's very certain songs and stuff like that are just like, kind of women of the 90s coming into their own. And it has that aspect to it, where this felt like it was attacking sort of this underlying current of sexism against women, in a different, harder way, which I appreciated. And it never felt ham-fisted to me.
Yeah, this is, take my opinion for whatever it's worth. I'm a guy, right? So get ready to dismiss my opinion if you're one of those people. But
I will. But go ahead.
But the way Captain Marvel handles feminism is, in my opinion, saying that women are not better than men, but they are so not taken advantage of, so discounted in society but inside every woman is a secret badass that can do anything, right?
Sure.
And that's a great message to send to someone who is younger and a little more impressionable, who needs a self-esteem boost, right?
Right. It's a ground building sort of thing.
Right. But the way Black Widow handles it handles it in that women are just as capable. Natasha a little more so, because she don't have any powers, and she's handling her own with these superpowered beings. But women are on the same level. But it is powerful men who are evil, powerful men who are holding them down.
Right.
Not just women can do anything. It's I don't put women on a pedestal. right? I don't necessarily believe all women, more so than I don't believe powerful men. Does that make sense?
Right. That makes sense. Right. Like, well, and I guess the perspective, boy, we're going to get some comments on this one.
We are, man. Look, just look, address your comments to me.
I'll never.
You can find my email,
which doesn't exist. No, but I agree with you. And I think I understand your point. Like, this movie, like, it's a generational difference, right? Like, at least that's how it reads to me. It's a generational difference. And I agree with you. Like, you do need to have, like, that's not to dismiss Captain Marvel's message, because I think it is important.
No, I think it's important, especially for younger girls, right? Like,
there's a big difference in also having a character who is a superpowered being, right? Because, like, when she, like, not just in her movie, but when she shows up in Endgame, she is a force to be reckoned with, and you need that, right? You've watched how many countless movies with dudes who are just absolutely not just like tough, but indestructible, just, gods basically, right? You needed to show, yes, young girls, you too can do that, right? Like, that's important, right? That's important. But with Natasha's character, you're right. Because she doesn't have powers, you have to send a different message, which is not that you are capable of anything, because Captain Marvel literally is capable of anything. You are just as capable as a guy, and you're right. You are being held. If you are not reaching that potential, like, and you're really trying and you're really making the effort to, you are likely in society, women are being held down by pieces of shit dudes, right? And as I saw in another review, and it's absolutely correct, is the bad guy, the true bad guy of this movie, he's not even on screen that much, and you hate him.
Like, you can't stand him, dude.
Right? Because of just the lines that he says. And I mean, there's a line in this movie. It's not a spoiler to the plot, but there's a line in the movie that is just brutal, which is, women are the one resource the world has too much of, is what he says, right?
God.
Which is just a fucking horrendous thing to say, right? Considering, like, this guy is manipulating women as weapons, right? So, like, the film does a really good job of saying, like, look, not only are women capable, like, but when the time comes, they can sever themselves from the bullshit from these men, these evil men. And it's not all men, right? Like, and that's a distinction that, I'm saying that for adults listening, not immature people listening. It's not that all men are evil, because that's not the point, because there is actually a guy that Nat is close to who is a good dude, like 100%. Like, he's a good dude 100%, right? He gives her tech and shit like that. He's not a bad guy in any aspect, but she has complicated relationships with every other guy in this movie. And it's for good reason. Even her surrogate father, like, who is fundamentally not a quote unquote bad dude, but he's also doesn't realize his place in her damage that he did to her, right? And he's reminded of that he did to both of his daughters, his quote unquote daughters. So there is a lot to be said here, and it's really quite smartly written. And I like that aspect, right? It doesn't bludgeon you over the head, but it also does make you think, right? Where, again, this is the bullets and punching aspect of the MCU. It doesn't really have to make you think, right? And Winter Soldier, in the same way, didn't have to make you think about government surveillance and stuff like that, but it did, right? And you go, oh, okay, that's a good point. Get back to, like, the knife fight. Like, that's awesome.
Right. Like, that movie's about the Patriot Act, but it has a super soldier, taking on 8 dudes in an elevator. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
and you can respect that. Like, that's what I love about it. Right. So I think this is very good. It won't reach the top pantheon of the MCU. I wouldn't say that. I don't think it's as good as Winter Soldier, if you want to compare it to that. But I did like it quite a bit. The other thing I will say is, this is, and I'm sure people are going to agree and some will disagree, this is the best close combat, like, across the entire movie that we've seen in the MCU. Like, it's the most brutal. It's easily the most brutal. And don't get me wrong,
visceral.
The fighting in Winter Soldier is awesome. But there's a lot of the fighting in Winter Soldier that's distant, right? Like Cap with the shield and it looks fucking dope and all that. But most of the fighting in this movie is like right up on each other, like, actual throwing kicks and punches, like a lot. And nobody has superpowers. Nobody is a roided up American flag running around. It's just a bunch of people kicking ass. And I think they purposely made the fighting as brutal as they did because it's a female led film. That they didn't want to be like, nah, this is like, oh, it's just a bunch of girls lightly punching. Nah, yo. Like not in this movie.
Like there's only so many leg scissors you can do in a movie, right? Like there's only so much
Hurricane Rana.
Right. And two, like I don't know where this notion came from that like a woman throwing a punch won't hurt. Like, nah, yo.
Now she know what she doing.
Yeah, yo.
These women do.
Right. Like these women do, yo. Like look at any female UFC fighter and tell me you could take a punch from them. Like, get out of here, man. Like,
I'm good.
You can't. So I don't, and these people are supposed to be like, these aren't your like average, run of the mill people, right? Like, so I never understood that. But, there's one other character that, causes a little bit of controversy in this thing. And, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about Taskmaster now.
Yeah.
Taskmaster I like the idea of Taskmaster as a villain, and I like Taskmaster's ability, right?
Yeah.
Of mimicking fighting styles. I just wish we got more of that. I wish we got more of that. And no spoilers, but Taskmaster doesn't say much. And I'm used to that character being kind of an arrogant person.
Right.
And, having a little more personality. But other than that, I think Taskmaster is a great antagonist. And I just wish we could have seen more of the abilities.
Yeah, I agree with you. When Taskmaster was on screen, the fighting was pretty dope. Like those scenes were awesome and they looked really great. There was one scene on the bridge, that first fight. It was a little dark, I thought, cause I really I was like, ooh, all right, this, like the first time you see the character, I was like, oh shit, son, it's gonna be awesome. But it was a little dark. Could have been my theater, I don't know. But, so I would say that I agree with you. It would have been cooler to see more of the mimics, right? Like you do get a couple moments where it's like, oh, that's Black Panther. That's, like there's a couple of times where if you've been watching and paying attention to what characters do, you can recognize some of the fight movements and not just the stuff you've seen in commercials.
Yeah. And I really wanted more of that. Like, I
agree.
And look, maybe we got enough, but I really wanted more because the little bit that I got, I really dug. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like they could have dug in more on that. And that would have been fun.
So, but that would be my only complaint about that character. My only complaint about that character.
Yeah, anything else you're hearing, it's irrelevant to me. It's irrelevant. I agree with you. More of Taskmaster not saying as much, does do a little damage to the character because I do think it would have worked better to get more of that personality and things like that. I think that would have been really helpful. To get
the back and forth. While you're like stuff like that is cool, right? Like, cause I don't know. Like if you look at like these UFC fighters, the ones that like talk trash and stuff in the ring, or Muhammad Ali made it his gimmick to just talk a bunch of S to people while he was fighting.
Right.
And I don't know, man. It just, I like that. I like that stuff sometimes.
Yeah.
So.
I hope the character is around in the MCU longer. That would be fun. But yeah, I agree with you on that criticism. Absolutely. All right, that is it for us for our review of Black Widow, and we will see. I don't know if we'll do a spoiler talk. We may just talk about it on the show, on the main show, because there are definitely some things that I think are worth getting into. So we'll see you guys next time.
See ya.